Hello, everybody. I am your host, Scott, coming to you from Toronto.
And I am Andy, as usual, coming to you from the United Kingdom.
Good to see you, Andy.
Likewise.
Still getting myself reacquainted with StreamYard here as I click various buttons and discover what I'm supposed to be doing.
You've been doing a great job with it for a very long time.
Figuring it out after a year. We are the Tea and Timbits podcast, global perspectives on business development to help you prosper. We are talking in the month of December about process and culture fit. I think we figured that sort of rounding out the year with a bit of reflection, not on specific business development activities, but more about the infrastructure and the and sort of the foundation that you need to have in place for that kind of success was worth chit-chatting about. We talked last month so to sort of tee that all up about the importance of process and culture and how those things, are going to work best when carefully balanced. And you can't.
It was last week only, actually, not last month. Yeah.
That's a very good point.
It's been a busy week for you, clearly. if last week feels like a month.
I thought I could get away with it for a sec by saying, well, last week was last month, but no, we're into the second week of December.
Right, yeah.
I'll stop talking. Andy, do you have a story that you want to share so we can get on with this one?
I do. This was one just a few weeks back, and it's not anything too big, but it caught my attention. I thought it would be an interesting one for the listeners, because I know that some of the people who listen this will be relevant to. I was in this company, be as vague as possible, but anyway, the sales manager, he was a guy who had a very demotivated team, and he was sending out motivational emails to the team. And he would do it every Monday because he felt that having the weekly meetings were a bit dull because they were always focused on the numbers and things like that. And he thought, well, I need to get the energy up in the team. And he sort of sent these motivational emails. And I said, oh, that sounds really good. And can I have a look at one of them? And it was really long and really boring, and there was no way anyone was going to read it. It was just like that. Oh, typical, his emails coming again, and he said, what can I do with it? And I said, well, just stop sending them. And so he did, and he was like, what should I do instead? Because I need to motivate the team. And I said, well, there are other ways of motivating the team, but I think you should still send a motivating message to them, but do it in a different way. Don't keep sending them emails. So what he did is he started writing handwritten post-it notes and putting them on their desk or on their computer. Okay. And they were a bit generic the first week. They were all very similar, sort of the same thing. Good job last week, keep it up, kind of thing. But by last week, he'd really sort of gone a bit more personal, and it was like, oh, Sherry, you've done that prospect you reached out to last week seems really engaged. Keep it up. Just little things like that, but actually specific and personal. And I mean, you can really see the energy now this week. You can really see the team is actually gone, really? Oh, this is quite nice. Yeah, I mean, it's just that little personal touch has made a bit of a difference. I've said that he can potentially now start reintroducing the emails, but they have to be individual, they have to be personalized, and they have to be much shorter, because of course not all the team are in all the time. But
right,
yeah, it was just a little approach, and I think that's the thing. It doesn't have to be all about these grand gestures and lots of words and perfectly crafted emails. Just turning up in a way that connects with people is sometimes all that matters.
Yeah, I like it. I'm gonna guess that for this person, in their head, they had imagined a very different outcome, and they had sort of built up the story for themselves around how these tomes were going to land and inspire enable greatness. And there's probably borrowing on some, personal life experience or narrative they'd seen in a film or something like that. But any chance was this person considered themselves an athlete, or was this a locker room kind of a
It's possible
inspiration.
they could have qualified for that category. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I had a feeling. It sort of smacked of the like coach giving the big speech kind of moment, but then doing it before every single game. And I think it can work, but not by email.
Yeah, but it doesn't land very well, does it?
Thanks for sharing, Andy. We're gonna talk. We're gonna kind of carry on quite continuously from the conversation we had last week. And you made the point after we finished the recording that a lot of times we talk around the concept, or we talk broadly, and we wanted to make sure we were also getting into specifics and steps and tactics that can be useful for achieving and enabling some of what we pontificate about. So Andy, you mentioned that there was, just as we were signing off, that, there's a whole bunch of other things that you didn't get to, but we sort of hit time. And that we wanted to get into some more of the steps that you can take to build process, enable process, get the culture right. So what was on your mind that we didn't get enough time to get into on the last one?
Well, I think it's to some extent more of a general thing that I feel when we're talking about process. To us who use processes quite a lot, but we talk around it. We talk about maybe the outcomes of the process and the impact that that following our process has, but we don't often give the tips to people to actually set up their own process who maybe don't have one at the moment. And so I think that's something that we should be throwing into our episodes and offering to people. And I think little things like just giving some tips on how to put some steps in place to actually define a cultural fit, for example, like last week. First thing is, of course, identifying what your core values are. What behaviors define your company culture. Things like transparency, innovation, customer first focus, whatever it may be, so things like that. But ensure that they're communicated clearly in job descriptions, in onboarding processes, and in the daily operations. So people are continually reinforced and very, very aware of what the company culture is. I think, the other step is, of course, standardizing the hiring process. So making sure that regardless of which department it is that's hiring, there's a structured interview process that includes an element for defining a person's cultural fit to the team. That can be, difficult to define, but, things like describing a time when you worked in a team environment and what role you played and how did you handle receiving feedback, things like that can often help to understand how a person responds to certain circumstances, gives you an idea of how that person would perform within your team and in your business. You can sometimes include practical exercises and case studies and things like that to help people reflect on real life scenarios that they've been involved with, which allows you to evaluate behavior in a different way. I touched on involving the team, and we talked around that. But I think when it comes to things like onboarding, certainly new employees, doing team interviews, or having a shadow day, those things can be incredibly valuable, and it also sends a good signal to the team as well that that you're respecting them and their opinions about things, and they will then be able to feedback and feel part of that process, which again helps to reinforce a good company culture.
Mm-hmm. I have some questions. How have you got a few more points, or we only scratched the surface?
No, go on. We'll start with your questions now.
I'm going to wind back to sort of where you started, which was defining core values.
Yeah.
I think that's worth just sort of making sure we didn't skip right past that point. It is so essential to make sure that you're able to say, listen, you're going to have to do a little bit of cultural evaluation for yourself. But I want you to know that these are the core values, and it should give you a sense of what you're coming into. And you said, like, define them and be clear about them, but I think it's just as important to be regularly communicating those
Yes.
and
Yeah.
reinforcing them, because it's one thing to have them down on paper, it's another thing to live them. And I've seen many times the statements that are just platitudes. They're not supported by action, behavior, culture. And so we say one thing, but we behave a different way. So values without practicing those values, I think we've all seen that failure. And so I wanted to sort of add my 2 cents on that point. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things I touched on as well, as the importance of communicating those values, and of course making sure that they are, clearly defined in job descriptions, customer onboarding, and in daily life, daily operations, things like that as well.
I think this is where a leader has a lot of responsibility to reinforce these things. And I like to remind the team how we do one thing is how we do everything. So this isn't just about like do it this way when we're in front of a client, but do it this way internally, so that when we're in a client, you don't have to switch gears.
It doesn't make any difference. Yeah, exactly.
Way of doing things. So yeah, like, we are all about process and structure, and there's one thing leads to another. It's a very stepwise sort of execution, that delivery that we follow. I mentioned last time with flexibility too. But when we're doing other things, when we're executing, sales calls and whatnot, if I see an absence of that same sort of intentionality, it really gets under my skin quickly. So then you talked about standardized hiring.
Yes, I did.
And I like that for sure. My caveat that I was going to add is standardized for the same role. I think you need to, we've tried to sort of fit the same hiring process around different job functions. In our case, we've got technical people and developers, we've got creative people, we've got account people, we've got sales people, and we had established a really robust capacity and capability for doing our technical interviews and hiring a developer. And we sort of tried to figure out the right way to layer that into some of the other roles. And we even tried it that way a few times years ago and thought, well, it worked there, this must be the right way to do it here, but it doesn't, right? So be really careful about, what worked for one job function isn't going to work for another one. And it's just as important to think about what your process and hiring standardization is going to be for each role, and not just kind of roll into the next interview for the next function, assuming it's going to work the same way.
Fair point. Fair point. Yeah. No, I do think that a framework, a standardized framework that is tailored to the individual departments and divisions works well in a large corporate, but I think in a smaller business you can tailor it a lot more.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Like our technical interviews are situational, but then practical evaluation of skill, right? And so it's very different to do that same framework for a salesperson, but not, right? So that was the thing where we were like, it just requires like, more brainstorming and more thinking, and the tactical expression of the skill might require more infrastructure than it does for a developer. You can't just give them a question on a blank sheet of paper and say, give us your solution to this algorithm or this problem. You might have to set up scenarios. You might have to get other people involved, which is what we discovered we needed to do for other roles. But it still is an evaluation of the skill. So yes, back to your point, the framework, I think, can be consistent. The application delivery of that requires some nuance.
Very valid point. Would you like to get into today's episode where we can share some steps and pointers in risk-based approach to management? which I know is a topic you are so excited about and can't wait for us to discuss, and isn't at all the reason that you've been avoiding getting to this topic.
Yeah, it was on the list of sort of like tactical things for delivering process and culture fit. It is something that I've seen. We use it as well. It helps with not just the communication of priority, but the understanding of different people's perspectives on the same issue or same priority. So, okay, so specific steps and tactics.
Before we get to it, what is a risk-based approach to management, or risk-based management approach?
Yeah, fair enough. It's where sort of your business priorities are not set, tracked, analyzed, considered sort of purely in an ad hoc way. Like, oh, I have this idea, and what would it look like? And we brainstorm, or we talk about the potential pros and cons of it. But it is to say, no, what is the risk of proceeding with this initiative? And a risk can have a negative impact on the business, or there's a risk that this succeeds more than we thought, and it's going to then have an upside risk. It's going to overwhelm us and be too good to be true, kind of a scenario. Mm-hmm. So it says, if we're really clear about the risk of proceeding with this, we'll be thinking ahead about how to mitigate those potential outcomes and manage them effectively. So some people really like this approach. It really works for the way that they think, and it's a prudent way to advance new ideas, push something through a process, and pick and choose and prioritize more effectively. Is that an approach you've seen yourself? Is this something you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be very clear that risk-based management isn't about avoiding risks. It's about understanding them and making informed decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But of course, the key steps, realistically, for step one is identifying the risks. But that's a very jokey sort of step. But the reality is that is what you have to do. But you need to categorize those, just like you were saying. You need to understand, are they strategic, operational, financial? Are there reputation risks? Is there regulations that we need to be considering when we're doing this? I mean, of course, in tech it's even more relevant with some of those things, and in industry maybe less so. But it's important to categorize those so that you can address them in the right way, prioritize them, and focus on them. And so that's obviously the next step, is assessing and prioritizing those risks, using tools and systems and processes that are available. Do you have any that you use, or is it well, how do you assess the risks? How do you assess the risks and make that prioritize?
Yeah, that's probably its own episode entirely.
It is, I think. Yeah.
But there are templates out there if you Google sort of.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Let's leave it there for now. I think we've covered a lot of ground, sort of like some of the tactics and the processes. The tactics and steps to sort of get into the delivery of process, and perhaps come back to sort of more of those specifics in a future episode. If you are looking to get a little bit more information, follow us and get in touch. We'd love you to go to tandtimbits.com, and we'll catch you on the next episode, Andy.
Thank you very much, Scott. I could have talked for hours on this topic that you don't enjoy.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.